Hey, everyone. It's Dr. Tamara Beckford with Your Caring Docs, where we bring you health and wellness information so that you can make the best decision for you. And we have this great segment, Your Caring Docs, Docs Who Cares, where we bring doctors from all over the world right here, and they let us know gems, wisdom, pearls, all of this great health and wellness information. And the best part is that they leave their info right here so you can find them if you'd like to be a patient or a client of theirs. Boom, all right here. Today, I'm really excited because we're going to go over a topic which is near and dear to me because we all have it. This behavior, and some of you have good, some of you have bad, right? But we all have it. So today we are going to have Dr. Cirino, but I'm going to bring him in proper Your Caring Docs fashion, right? So Dr. Cirino is a graduate of Ohio University College of Osteopathic Medicine. He's also has a master's of public health from the George, because we can't just say George Washington, we have to say the George Washington University School of Public Health. He is the founder and CEO of Your Health Forum, which optimizes health by creating behavioral change. Let us bring in Dr. Christopher Cirino. All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beckford, for that wonderful welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. Now, you're all about behavioral changes and how we can use that to optimize our health and wellness, right? But where did all of this come from? What did your interest, or where did your interest in behavior come from? Tell us.
Well, I think it does come from pretty much the beginnings, my birth and being brought up with my family. We had a lot of stressors, bringing up. I had two older brothers, and there was, unfortunately, a little bit of childhood exposure to trauma. And I began to learn that only really recently how much that affected the way my body showed itself and the way that I dealt with stressors as a child growing up. And so I dealt with health issues. I gained weight, and I looked at certain foods for comfort. And later on in my life, during residency, with all those other challenges growing up, and going through residency and how many hours of work, I latched more onto food for coping. And so I got to the point where I became obese. And so, I'm not at this time, I'm healthy in my weight, and I was able to figure out that stepwise changes, little changes even, produced a form that led to, in a sense, a direction towards health. And I had to really come face to face with those traumas, whether it was being yelled at or other forms of abuse, and through that experience, I grew to become healthier.
Wow. Something important that you mentioned is that you learned how to make small changes. And I think that that's a big highlight, because a lot of times whenever we want to change, period, I was going to say change behavior or change it, but any change, we usually look for the hugest. Well, I am going to just stop XYZ.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure that is probably one of the most challenging forms of behavioral changes, is try to just say, I'm just going to stop. So talk about how you used some of what you're learning or what you have endured and build these small changes, and how you have noticed it, changing your health and your wellness.
Well, yeah, and that's sort of the point of the message that really drives me. My motivating factor for starting Your Health Forum is that, the greater the hold the behavior has on us, the greater the amount of suffering it takes to change. and you think of the most egregious behaviors like drug addiction, which
Right.
essentially is a very fit and this pattern that develops essentially in between. We are sentient beings, but otherwise we are almost like automatons to those drugs. So in grappling with my understanding of this, I face many patients in my specialty of infectious disease, or even just primary care, that unfortunately are just adding the fuel unknowingly to the fire of their diseases. And so I went to the point of understanding, how can someone so egregiously decide to become homeless or decide to use drugs? And of course that doesn't happen. It happens in stepwise fashion. No one would ever just think that a drug would lead them to a point where they would decide to totally rob themselves of their own personal securities, their basic needs of shelter, to continue that drug. Yet, even in the chronic diseases that we see, someone who may have obesity or diabetes, they face those similar circumstances where they continue to cycle in that behavioral link to what they're coping with. And so that is what led me on that path to trying to discover, how do we tap into that, into the source of one's behaviors, the source of one's disease.
Wow. So what are some of the things that you're finding out? Because this is fascinating to me, because some of the questions that you have are some of the questions that I have too, when I think, and especially about those who are suffering from addictions. And, I always think there was this one point where something probably occurred that either tipped them over, and then there's a vulnerability that occurred that someone took advantage of that vulnerability. It's like you said, it's not just today I'm successful, I'm in a stressful environment, and then tomorrow I'm homeless. There is usually, or addicted to substance and then leading to homelessness. I feel like there's like a vulnerability that occurs at a point. Is that what you're finding out?
Yeah, that's what I'm finding out. And right now I'm actually, I made a change from infectious disease recently, and I'm working in a prison setting. And so I do see, I see that, just the people just have such wonderful spirits, yet, got to the point of doing something illegally. And some of it was driven by drug use. But yes, that's a good point. And I think about this, and I think what I started to understand is and again, this is something that I think is alluring, and something that is a mystery in many ways, is how to get to the behavior, the source of behavior. Therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, we all have that same question and approach.
Absolutely.
Yet, here we are throwing medications at behaviors, or giving therapies to, in some ways it can help to unravel the understanding. Yet one of the things about behaviors is that they don't want to change. And so it's trying to understand how to get to that source. And so I look at it this way, and I think to many of the audience, they may feel similarly, is when we have a behavior, that behavior is a complex version of an instinct that we have. Even at a cellular level, think of the simple single-celled organisms, an amoeba or you give it a little bit of a stimulus of something that the body needs for fuel. Think of an infant feeding. Here we're talking about a single-celled organism. It goes to that. There is a result of a benefit to go towards those things. And yet, if there's something that causes displeasure or pain, we go away from that. And so I think in a lot of ways, and now you bring in that infant that is being born into this world, the first thing that is removed from it is that comfort source, and the food. And so in many ways, the ripple effect to that are these more nuanced behaviors that develop later on in time. But even in utero, the infant is already being exposed to an environment of neurotransmitters or of hormones from the maternal environment. And even in that setting, we know there are associations with increased risk of drug addiction in that setting. And also diseases, chronic diseases like diabetes, and someone who has just a mother who has gestational diabetes. So it's really a hand in glove of that organism, that cell, and the environment.
Wow. So we've talked about now, I usually, I have to recap because this is fascinating to me. So we've talked about behavioral changes and how micro changes occur, and also even that there's usually a stepwise fashion to some of these changes and behaviors, not changes, but behaviors that we see within our adults. And a lot of times the behaviors usually goes towards something that's innate within us, right? Towards pleasure. And you usually try to move away from behaviors that produces displeasure, right? Pain or harm. And if we even think about us, how we're even wired as humans, or even wired as cellular organisms, because even a single cellular organism will still try to move towards something that's pleasurable. Right? Yes. Us with our millions of cells, we're all still wired to the same thing as that same single cellular organism. And some of what's going on, it starts in utero, means it starts even before you're born. Your environment is there before you're born. The environment is for the child, whatever is going on in the mother is something that is connecting with a child. So the risk of diseases doesn't just start as when you're born, it starts even before that.
Yes.
It's and that's what makes this so complex, and why it's not just one answer to this question. Well, why can't we change? Well, because there's so many moving parts. And some of it you have no control over.
No control.
It occurred before you were even there.
And that's why we trip into basically developing an environment that could potentially be abusive unknowingly.
Right.
We select partners. We select other experiences that are just equally harmful to us, because that is how we related. And so it's this legacy effect. You can imagine. And unfortunately, from this kernel, just as you can imagine a grain of sand developing a pearl within a plant, this little kernel reaches out into every part of what it is to be, an organism, a human.
The human being. Wow, wonderful. So now with this and with all that we've talked, you have recognized some of this, the behavioral changes, and how it has its effect on health and also on wellness. And because of that, you decided, you know what, I'm not just going to stand back and watch this. I'm going to do something about it. And so you created the Your Health Forum, which you used to help to optimize health. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I remember as doing primary care when I first moved out to the Northwest. I couldn't find an infectious disease job right away. And I had many patients that were coming in, and they're like, what is it? Yeah, I have this problem. What are you going to do to help me? And, what would you be able to do to help me, basically? And, in many ways, I agreed with them, because I think this kind of doctor-patient scenario of the doctor having this knowledge asymmetry, unfortunately, was misguided. And what happened is that many times the patient often had within them the answer, although may in a sense be the blind spot to it. In a sense, our behaviors are a blind spot. And so
Absolutely.
they would come in and we would just have the same discussion many times, okay, let's go up on this medication or let's start this, or doctor, I have, what can you do for me? And they're, well, I'm not being able to sleep, and I'm sleeping during the daytime. And so maybe you can give me a sleeping pill, or maybe you can give me something to keep me awake during the day. Lo and behold, we were just covering and sort of blindly moving forward and using medications to treat behaviors. And so I thought, well, maybe at least, because I know words are transformative, you can be told something, an encouraging word, and that in itself can begin a ripple effect of transformation within you if the cues are correct, or vice versa. You can be told, you're nothing but this, whatever explicative. And in many ways, those abuses that we sometimes try to overlook, they ripple into our adulthood. And so trying to understand compassion, I thought I would at least start with words, with giving information. And so I would oftentimes, spend maybe 45 minutes to an hour in a patient visit and not realizing how much that would drain me during the day. And that was another lesson I learned about compassion and the difference of the entanglement of codependence that I had to grow up, to learn that I myself had that growing up in a more of an abusive household.
Right.
So I thought I would start with words. And that's sort of what began with maybe a few articles that I wrote and posted a few years ago to now more than 170.
Wow.
Yeah.
Impact.
Yeah.
Impact.
And hopefully it's a movement, it's a movement.
Yeah, I love that word. I love that word, movement, because it means that it's like you said, it's not just, it's a ripple, it's a tsunami. It's a tsunami of love, compassion, and ways to improve not just your life, because and that's the other thing too, why when you discuss that whole codependence, a lot of us, when we help others, it helps us. So a lot of the care that we provide, and that's one of the things I always want to emphasize to those who listen, like doctors, we're caring people a lot by nature. We will sit and and that is to our fault. Sometimes people get upset at us. Why? Because you're sitting and you're spending so much time with that other patient, and now you're late coming to me. Yeah. But it's the care. If you sense that other person needed that extra 10 minutes, it's hard when you're a naturally caring person to not give it to them because you see that they need it. Not saying that you don't need it also, but you can kind of sense the connection between humans and the humanity. It's definitely, it's important. So
it is.
Making movement. Go ahead again.
I was just going to share
movements. I love it.
I always thought it was just so fascinating that sometimes, I would have patients that just immediately acknowledged, the efforts and that compassion coming from me, and I think that's a cue because not all patients do. I can't be a guide for all people. And we know that even doctors are being replaced or people are seeking other means of understanding themselves through other providers, through other formats. And so I see the transformative power of that communication, that relationship that can develop. And I do think, sure, we can talk about spiritual, we can talk about other things, but I mean, we do have some wonderful physical explanations that help us to understanding why things transform, why we're able to transform. And I think, just a wonderful, neurotransmitter, oxytocin, which, you know, is considered a love neurotransmitter, though can also be a source, the drive for aggression if the cues are different. But has that physical approach. It allows for uterine contraction and for breast milk to really
the mom and baby bonding.
I think there's even I think even that speaks to emotion in many ways. And I think what's really fascinating is that, you know, thoughts and behaviors are structures in our brain, are neurotransmitter units in our brain, and that we have the capability of changing that. Now, you know, how much can we change what we don't know we need to change is definitely up for discussion. But I do think that there is some empowerment with that message. And hopefully there is a potential of transmitting and developing behavior change.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, as we mentioned, sometimes it's challenging to change what you don't know exists. One thing that if you do know something exists, you do know that you have a behavior that you would love to alter for the better.
Yes.
For the better. Then, you know, a stepwise approach is that way. Now, you let us know. Are you and how can these people work with you? But, you know, how can these, because I know a lot of people are listening. They're like, yes, I connect with Dr. Cirino. I get what he's saying. And this is how I've been feeling, but I haven't been able to explain it to others. You know, how can they come and work with you?
Well, as of now, I had to make some changes with COVID-19, but I did start some local community health seminars that I was giving, and essentially under 4 steps. A few of them were on mindfulness. One of what was on longevity, you know, talking at the cellular level and vascular level. And then finally, one was sort of health, the big picture. Absolutely. I did post them on my my blog, so on my health website for the audience to see. So as of now, my goals for this movement would be to eventually, and I have written some children's books too, that because I realize that in many ways, a great model for a living thing is a plant. You know, and if you think about the tree and its rungs of growth, I do think, and that they're not, you know, once you get past that rung, you know, it's not like there's no communication. There is communication.
That's true.
We are constantly in communication with our inner child, and so I think for that reason, I thought a children's book is a great way to get to the, you know, closer to the source.
Absolutely. Wow.
And so I continue to write, and I continue to plan on pivoting and thinking of how to develop this movement further.
That's right. The movement of creating change, behavioral change for our health and wellness. Alrighty, now that I've pulled all of this info out of you, I need one more info for our listeners. So, Dr. Cirino, if you weren't a doctor, what would you be?
Wow. You know, I have a lot of thoughts right now, and I could share one with you. Well, in a few different convoluted ways, but I, as a physician, I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to travel around the world and really start to understand the nature of what it is to be a human being. I remember as just traveling, and I was doing a work experience in Ecuador, and ultimately I met my wife during the second time I went to Ecuador. But when I was there, I took a little leisure time, and I went into a small on a tour through the jungle in Ecuador. And when we came back from that trip, a very frightening thing was happening in someone's life. A woman was holding her child. They were walking on the side of the road, and a truck had hit her child. And I remember just right away, I kind of asked permission for the driver of our vehicle, and we brought the mother in with her child, and we drove to the nearest clinic within the town. And I brought the child in my arms, and we set her on a table. There were two doctors that let me in to evaluate her. Immediately in examining the child, I know that the pupils were blown, and there was actually one of those frightening signs, a Cullen sign, as well as bleeding within the child's private part, all a sign of significant risk for life, intra-abdominal bleeding, and also intracerebral bleeding. And I just remember at that time, the doctors had a very much of a wash their hands approach, because in Baños, which is about 4.5 hours from Quito, the only place that would have the ability to
resuscitate her. Yeah.
There was a huge treachery, a huge pathway to get her to anyone that could potentially help them. And the looks on the doctor's face really revealed it all, that it was just like, there's nothing we can do. And there was no further emotion to it than that. And so, in that experience, and also the experience of in Africa and in other areas where I visited, just about how people grapple with those experiences every day of their life, potentially trauma, that it really kind of opened up my heart to, the healing power that we have. So I think if I were, I remember when I was choosing between medical school and graduate studies, I always wanted to be an anthropologist, to study, to learn about humans and, kind of nature of what it is to be human. And so I think that's the inner self of me, which is really not necessarily the being the doctor was just a kind of an outcropping of what it really was for me, which was being inside, understanding healing. So I think that's what I would be.
Anthropology.
Well, a healer. A
healer.
Yeah.
You see, this is what I love about this question. Everyone that I've asked this question, that have given me an answer, ironically, they're doing exactly what they said they would be doing if they weren't a doctor, in a roundabout way. So I've asked this question. Yeah, think about it. I've asked this question about and another doctor, and she said, I'd be a motivational speaker. And she was already motivated, and she was already, so I said, you're doing it. And
life is the reveal, it's a reveal.
It is.
Of that inner drive. And if we don't calculate that, that's where oftentimes we face the reality that the job is a paycheck and not the driving force of what it is as we as human beings face, each of us.
Absolutely. See, I love it. A healer, but you're already healing. And the thing about you as a healer, you're doing it in a all-encompassing way.
Yeah.
So yes.
Awesome. I know. And I remember when I was in college, I learned about fractals. I took the best classes that I took in college. It was called Fractals in Geology. And I was just so fascinating. And it reminds me, I did a project on leaves, by the way, and I talk about plants in my writing as well. Right. And even when I was in 3rd grade, we had a leaf project going back then. So, and I remember I listed one of my favorite careers to be a botanist. Right. But the fascinating part of that is that as we unravel, as we grow and we develop, starting from the zygote to, to the murula, to the different phases of our growth, we unravel into an organism that is both similar at the small level and at the large level. So I think that is within, to me, that is the substance of where we need to go to understand where health is. You know, I know it's not clear. It's really hard to get this into words sometimes. But if you think about how we grow and sustain ourselves, and you think about how disease occurs, you know, disease occurs at the cellular level, and then it shapes into and manifests into what we can see with our eyes. And that is how behavior, that is the source of how behaviors are. We get into this cycle. You know, think of the ACEs study, that's the Adverse Childhood Events Study, and how, you know, an event can impact one in a dose-dependent way to having chronic diseases. And so think of that, and this sort of reveal of who we are as organisms. And eventually we realize that, you know, the behavior is ultimately where disease, so disease is held in our brain.
Yes. Wow. Fascinating.
Yes.
I love how we ended up going full circle. And I love how you revealed within yourself what you would have been if you weren't a doctor, but then you're already doing it.
I do too.
This is
fascinating. I imagine if I asked you the same question, you would probably have similar answer.
I'll probably find, yeah. I asked everyone this question, but have I sat down and thought about it? No.
We are, I know, we have
I have to, but I love getting the answer. As I said, I love getting this answer right, and I love my raw reaction to it, because it's always fascinating to me, and I've learned so much from all of our colleagues, and absolutely it's a pleasure. I've learned so much from you today too. Before we head on out of our great convo, let us know where our listeners can find you.
Well, as of now, probably the best start for me would be looking at my website. It's called Your Health Forum. And if you look that up on Google, that would be the first result. The website handle is Your Health Forum by drcirino.org. But I also have developing, I have yourhealthforum.net, which is more of kind of a business platform, some of the things that I plan to offer. You can certainly look me up for my writing. I have 5 children's books that I've co-authored or authored. And I'm really hoping this year I can release the first of many of the books I'm working on, which would include some of the things we talked about. And again, just like you said, my goal and my direction is really whole body. You know, is looking at this at a cellular level, but how that manifests in our body.
Absolutely. And don't forget the movement. Don't forget the movement that just
started. Join me. Write your name in. Sign up to and subscribe to my website. I have from only me as a sole author, I have a total of 8 authors that I'm also added on to the site. So we're hoping to get some more wonderful articles that kind of show the flip side of medicine, not just, you know, listing out, you know, like if you go to the ER and as you know, right?
That's ER doc. Hey, I know.
Right? You know those little packets of information that patients get about what their disease is.
Yeah.
I want to give them the, you know, the sort of the anti packet, you know, which is basically, this is what you have and this is what could happen. Here's how to improve that before you get into the ER or the hospital.
Yep. Prevention is better than cure. That is what I believe. All righty. Well, you will be able to find all of Dr. Cirinos at Your Health Forum. That's YOUR Health Forum. And also you'll be able to find this info here on Your Caring Docs, but ours is CARINGDOCS.com. And you'll be able to find this podcast wherever you do listen to your podcast. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, Google, and we're also on Anchor FM or anywhere else where you listen to your podcast. You'll be able to find this wonderful, wonderful episode. And if you are a visual learner, you'll be able to find this on our YouTube channel. That's YouTube/Your Caring Docs, URCARINGDOCS. So I'm Dr. Tamara Becker with Your Caring Docs, and we are very, very thankful to Dr. Christopher Cirino.
Thank you, Tamara. It was really a pleasure to talk with you today.
Oh, the pleasure
I
is
appreciate
mine.
the invitation.
Thank you so much for letting us into your world and also informing us about all the behavioral changes and how we can learn more about what you're doing and the movement that Dr. Cirino started. Watch out, world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bedford. Thank you so much. And optimal health can be possible. And then
Absolutely. Love it. Optimal. That's where we're going to end with.
Optimal health is possible.
Optimal health is possible. Yes. I'm Dr. Tamara with Your Caring Docs. Thank you guys for listening, watching, and tuning in. We will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.